First of all, I came to this country in 1963. I was 12.
Yeah.
That's one. Then I went to a local school in Brixton Hill called Tulse Hill, the same school that he went to. Mm-hmm. You know that school?
Yeah.
Right. I left that school about 68. Mm-hmm. I came 63, yeah, when I was 12 in 1963. Yeah. And then I went into photography. I started to work in the West End in a photographic studio. And that's where I learned photography from. And then in the 70s, late 70s, I started to work as a freelance photographer for a black newspaper. That's the guy with this book. The publisher was the owner at the time. Mm-hmm. And he was my boss as a freelancer.
Not Claudia then?
No. The book was published by ANSIB, the Arif Ali. Mm-hmm. And he was the boss of West Indian World.
Okay.
And I was working for him as a freelance photographer. And then, after that, I started to do freelancing photography in the community. I'll go back. Then after that, I started a magazine called Root Magazine, which was the first black glossy magazine in the UK. Had he told you, I would have brought some copies for you to photograph. And then after that, I started Choice FM Radio, which is the first black successful radio station in Britain. And that was in 1990, and 2004 we sold it to Capital Radio. Mm-hmm. They're changing it now to Global, to Capital Extra. After that, I've been a community activist. Back in 1972 or so, by about in the 60s, in the late 60s, early 70s, I joined the Black Panther movement. Mm-hmm. The Black Panther, British Black Panthers, you've heard about them. Mm-hmm. And you must have, Shakespeare Road, yes. So I would consider myself a key member of that, where as a photographer I went around the country photographing people and protests and so forth.
Yeah, let's start with 1963, when you came to England with your family, I presume?
No, I came by myself. My parents, mother and father, already came to Britain in the 50s, early 50s. And they was in a position now to send for me to join the rest of the family here. We lived at Crust Road in Brixton Hill, Half Elm Park. So as a young boy at 12, I arrived at Heathrow, and I was absolutely shocked with the environment I saw, with everything. And this man came over and kissed me, and I thought, who is this? And I noticed it looked like my grandfather. So I worked it out, it must be my father, because when he left Jamaica, I was only 3 months old. So, he took me home, and I went to Brixton Hill, across the road, and my mother wasn't there. So they said I should look through the window, and I would see her coming from the shops. So after about 3 ladies passed, I saw somebody like her, and I said, is that her? And they said, yes. So she left me too when I was 18 months. I stayed with my grandmother. So, yeah, that was the experience. It was shocking because I expected a big house with lots of space around it. You could play football and cricket or anything like that. What I got was a terrace house with a tiny garden. And that was it. If we need to play a game, we need to go to the park. And, a totally different environment. And then I was luckily accepted in Tulsa School, which was a big comprehensive school and experiment. In those days, there was 1,800 boys. I enjoyed the school because it had a lot of facilities, games, sports, Army cadets, which I was a member, the workshops, technical department, art department, and so forth. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. I left out school as a prefect, which was shocking to me. I was shocked. They called me and said, well, be a prefect. I said, no, I can't do that. And then I finally accepted. And when I was leaving, they offered me a prize. That's strange. Me a prize? And I got a prize. So I don't know what it was for, but maybe for good behavior. So yeah, that's it. So it was quite interesting.
It sounds like quite a dramatic arrival in the UK. There must have been so many huge shocks for you coming to Brixton. Can you give us a sense of what Brixton was like when you arrived?
It was difficult, really. I call it expectation. What did I expected? You know, my expectation was totally different. My assumption was that most people, you know, particularly my siblings and others, would end up as professional people, lawyers and doctors and accountants and these things. And I was totally shocked about that. I expected equality. I didn't see that. So there are many expectations that I didn't, you know, realize. That was shocking to me. And of course, they're still shocking to most people, including myself.
I can only imagine what that must have felt like. But going to school, it sounds like you had a very successful time at school.
Well, I wouldn't call it successful. I was, I think, I don't know, I have this particular way about me where I'm humble and I really wanted to learn. I really wanted to be successful in life because I know, you know, it's like the footballers that came from a poor background in South America, Africa. They're the best in the field because they need to perform and to be successful to help their family. And that's how I felt. I really need to be successful. I was hungry for success. And that's what drove me along, you know, to do what I did.
What drove you specifically to photography?
That's an interesting question. I was thinking about what was best for me as a person. And in order for you to do that, you need to know yourself. You need to know your weakness and your strength. If you don't know your weakness and your strength, then you're going to have problems in life. And I know I was good in the creative department, in the arts and so forth. So I decided that photography would be good. Considering that my best friend was also a very creative person and an artist, and he could paint and draw better than me. So I was thinking, there are many schools in the UK, God knows how many, and there must be many artists in those schools wanted jobs. And if this guy is better than me, how on earth am I going to make a success out of that? So I decided that I was watching TV one day, and I saw a young man coming from a working class district, a working class community, and he decided to be a photographer, and he ended up being a photographer for all the trendy people. His name is David Bailey. And I thought, that's good. If David Bailey can do it, I can do it also. So I went back to school and said I want to be a photographer, and my careers officer said, you know, in those days you have a careers officer. You can't leave school without a job. There's millions of jobs available. So she said to me, well, what are you going to do? I said, I want to be a photographer. And she said, well, there's nothing I can do to help you. You just have to find it yourself. I said, no problem, I'll find it. I picked up the Evening Standard, looked through it, saw some jobs going in photographic department, developing and printing and so forth. And I applied and I was successful. So that's what drove me. And I believe that it was a good discipline for me because I wanted to be the best photographer in my community. because there weren't really any good photographers at the time. And I felt that there was a niche there that I could slot into and do some real good stuff, which I think I did achieve those.
So when you say there was a niche, do you mean that there was a niche in terms of people working in photography from a similar background to you, or the photography produced representing the people you were talking about?
Well, we are talking about late 60s. There were very few photographers, maybe one or two or three, and they weren't very good. So it was like wide open. It was an open field for me to vegetate it, and that's what I did. I went straight into a photographic company and learned the rudiment of photography, producing adverts and enlarging stuff and doing all sorts of background work, and that's what I did. And I believe I have some sort of a theme about what I do, and a determination. So that's when I bump into the British Black Panthers giving out leaflet in Brixton. And they invited me to their place, and I went to the office in Shakespeare Road, and they say, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a photographer." They're great. You can be our photographer, which lead me around to follow them around the country wherever they go for demonstration or picnics or meetings or what have you. So I recorded all their activities over that period.
So this is the 60s, early 70s, when you were starting out as a photographer. Were you practicing in the streets in Brixton as you were working, as you mentioned, in enlarging and that kind of thing? How did you manage to actually keep shooting? What was your sort of practicing?
Well, remember, as a professional, I was working in the business in the daytime. In the evenings and weekend, I would photograph weddings and christening and life, so to speak, friends and what have you, passport photo, the whole spectrum of things open up. So I was very busy. And of course, people were liking what I did. So some of my greatest work maybe is around that period where I was unwittingly recorded people in the environment without realizing what I was doing. I've got maybe 30,000 images. But I didn't know the value of those at the time and how important they would be one day, But I would just keep taking photos and doing this. And I just file them and keep them in a good place. And 90% of them are still good. Going back over 30, 40 years. So yeah, it just happens. As time goes on, things keep changing and moving around.
Do you have any favourites that stick out for you?
Oh, that's very difficult. I can't say, but there are some striking images, like the one called "Keep Britain White." I don't know if you've ever seen that image. It was graffitied by National Front in Balham in about 1974, where they put graffiti on the building, the community building. That building was training young black women how to achieve office practice skills, typing shorthand and all these things, because companies or businesses were complaining that people from the black community did not have the skill to be, proficient in the employment environment. So this project was set up by a Bishop Woods, and it was called the Martin Luther King Foundation Center, International Personnel in Balham, and it was attacked by the National Front. And I went along and photographed the door, which is quite important. I mean, the Tate Gallery has got copies, the VNA has got copies, the Brixton Archive has got copies, many people have got it. But there are many, many images like those.
And that was when you were photographing for the British Black Panthers?
That was when I was photographing for the West Indian World that happened. Okay. By then, the Black Panther already dissolved. They started about 68 or so, and they dissolved by about 72, 74. Yeah.
And then, so when you were working with the Black Panthers and the office was in Shakespeare Road, can you explain to us a bit about, because I think particularly within the sort of broader context of communications, the British Black Panthers is a group that has been communicated in the main through a very kind of narrow prism. And to sort of understand that organisation, can you give us a sense of what the kind of day-to-day work was going on and what you were doing as a member of the Black Panthers, going out photographing sort of injustices going on and publishing that presumably?
Well, what the Black Panther movement was a campaigning organisation, and it was basically to educate or to make the community be aware of discrimination and what society was doing, what the police were doing, their reaction to black people, and what parliamentarians was doing, like the immigration bills and the repatriation bill, and facilities that were not available. So they were really was a campaigning organization that was educating young black people who didn't go to university about Marxism and Leninism and so forth, so that they could understand the system and the country better, because most people don't really understand what capitalism is about, and the organization wanted to explain. And they also were concerned about the development of slavery and how it affected people, culture, and psychologically. And but at local level, if they believe that a black person was wrongly treated either by the police or anybody else, they may go and picket the police station or get lawyers to represent them in court and so forth. So it was like a campaigning organization, but based on education. And that's basically what they were about.
So you were focused, based in Brixton, but the movement was going all around the country, and were you travelling with them as well?
Yes, there was a branch in West London, North London and Brixton. But Brixton was basically the main branches. And if there were somebody anywhere in Britain that felt that they've been disadvantaged or been treated badly by racist or government, Black Panther would support them by going to wherever, Bradford or Leeds or Bristol, and help them to demonstrate against that and let the community and the authority aware that there are other people, conscious people that are looking and concerned about what's happening to the development of black people in Britain.
And how did that experience of being involved with that group and becoming more politically aware, more politically engaged, how did that develop you as a person and also as a photographer? Oh,
I think it was fantastic for me. I didn't go to university, so that was my university. I understand the system, I understand society, the structure and so forth. And more important, I understood myself. Of course, as a black person going to school in this country, we were not told about our own history, and how, our ancestors were taken from Africa and no compensation was given to us, but the slave owners was rewarded with lots of money, billions in today's money terms. So it was a way of, understanding yourself and be proud of who you are. In those days, black people were trying to look like European, to have the hairstyle, to behave. It was at that period when we changed our perception by saying that we are no longer colored, we're now black, which was a bit difficult for our parents' aged and older people to understand that, because they were brought up as being called colored. And we felt that the best thing to do was to change that perception about colored and turn it in and call ourselves black, which is a political color. It's not an actual color. You're either white or you're black. And so that was what the Panther was doing. But lots of people couldn't understand that, because at school you would be called black bastard, nigger, this, that. But we said, no. We're not colored anymore, we're black. Call me whatever you want, and that's it. So we put a stop to all of that negative ways of perception. And it was very difficult for our parents, even my parents, to accept that. It took many, many years for them to, understand what the process was.
Why did they find that so difficult?
Because they weren't politically aware, and they were quite happy being called colored. Because apart from being a nice colored gentleman, you say, no, I'm not a colored gentleman, and I'm a black person. So there's nothing worse than being called than black. It's black, I'm black. Do you understand?
It was a case of reclaiming that term for yourself and completely.
Yes, and also it means other people could join. The Indian community could join, other Arab, all the non-white can join us. It's a political statement encompassing a wide range of people. And that's what it was.
And that kind of galvanizing effect of people into this political idea, how did that develop in the community in Brixton? Like what did you see as a photographer moving around in terms of people's changing attitudes when people started to gain a sense of unified identity like that?
Well, basically what was happening in those days, in the late 60s, in the 60s, everybody had tremendous respect for the police. And it was almost impossible for a young person like me then to tell my parents that the police was ill-treating us, was discriminating against us. Our parents would not believe anything like that. So it took a long period of time for them to get around to accept. And usually it's when they themselves have been stopped by the police or badly treated by the police that they start to accept. So as time goes along, the whole community now accept that the police has been treating black people differently from the rest of the community. And I think that's when the community came as one and start campaigning for better condition and better rights, and our police should treat us better. Stop.
And as a young person living in Brixton at that time, and you mentioned the conflicting ideas you had with your parents, it sounds like that must have been quite a lonely place.
Well, never for me. I'm never lonely because I know I'm right. And I know that one day, they will come around because what we're doing was the correct thing. And it was never a problem for me. Because my experience I can't say I was personally discriminated many times. I have been discriminated against, but not significantly, except on one occasion where I was discriminated against. It wasn't physical, but it was not right. And that occasion, or that situation, changed my whole perception of what I should do with my life. I was I went to a club in Streatham, and in those days you have to dress up in tie and suit and so forth, which we did. And I got there on the Monday evening about 7:30, and they said, "Oh, sorry, you're late. Come back next week." So the following week we came back again, even dressed better than before. And they said, "Sorry, we don't want you in here." I said, "Why? Why don't you want us in here? Others are going in and we just come to enjoy ourselves as young people just leaving school. We're well dressed. Why?" They said, "We just don't want you here and you should leave." And then we said, "Look, we're not going to leave, because I don't see why we should not go inside the club. We have money to pay and so forth, just to enjoy ourselves. We're not making trouble." And the attendant say, "If you don't go now, I'm going to call the police." And of course, if you say, "I want to call the police," to a black person, they will always say, "Call the police." I don't know why, but I said, "Call the police." Police arrive and say, "Look, they don't want you here. Go home." So I said to the police officer, he was a detective, I will not go home. I don't see on what basis I cannot go into this club." I would have expected him to say to the owner of the club, "Let them in." But he turned to me and he said, "I'm going to tell you one more time. Leave or else I'm going to arrest you." So I thought about it for a split second, and it's always important to think about things rather than being irrational and aggressive. So I thought about my parents coming to the police station in Streatham, trying to bail me out, and feeling so angry and sad that I've been arrested. So I decided to leave. That split second of decision is always very important in people's life. So I just left. So on my way back, walking up to Brixton Hill, I thought about the situation and felt very angry about it, that we were rejected because of the color of our skin. So I decided then and there that I'm going to fight against unfairness and discrimination for the rest of my life. And that's after that I met the Black Panthers, and that's why I joined.
So your first job in Brixton Market, can you tell us about that?
Yes, that would be about 68. Obviously I come from a working class family, and I felt I need to do something to get some pocket money and so forth. In fact, in those days it was traditional that people would do paper rounds or other little odd jobs so they could have money for school dinners and pocket money generally. So I went to Brixton Market. In those days there were no black person owned, except one person owned a curtain shop. His name is Columbus. And there was another person called Martin. I think about 2 persons had any sort of business in Brixton. And I started to work in a grocery shop, selling, packing people's bags. So whenever somebody come to buy, I would go and pack the bags. And then I would fill the counters, they fill the shelves with replacement food or cans or whatever you. And then at the end of the day, this will be Friday evening and Saturday, I will now deliver their groceries to their houses around Brixton. The the Sainsbury's stuff and all these current deliveries, like way, we're way ahead of that. You know, we'll go to Burton's Road, Romola's Road, Brixton Hill, Croxted Road, all around Brixton, delivering groceries. So, and I enjoy that very well. And I could see the makeup of Brixton changing from that, which is striking now because it actually reversed. You know, in '68, there's only a couple of people with businesses there, and today, 2015, there are hardly any black businesses in Brixton. So we actually reversed the role. Over to you.
So when you're saying we reversed, you mean that in '68 there were very, very few black businesses, and now there's a considerable number? Less.
There are not many black businesses in Brixton. In the market, for instance. I only count maybe 3, 4. Have you been to Brixton Market recently? Do you notice any black businesses, any restaurant or anything in the market?
There seems to be a very small number, which is why I wanted to just clarify with you what exactly you were saying.
What I'm saying, we've gone back to where we were in the 60s. We reversed. Our community was lost out for whatever reason, and we're no longer in control economically in Brixton.
Do you feel there was a time where there was a greater balance of control?
Yes, I think certainly in the 70s and early 80s, after some of the riots, there were opportunities. I'm not blaming anybody. I mean, this is capitalism. It does moves in the way it wants. Money always control things. You know, the people with money don't burn buildings and throw stone. They use money to change the face of people's life. And that's what's happening in Brixton. If somebody's going to buy a building for £1 million, then somebody will sell it and move to Thornton Heath, where they can buy a building for 300,000. And the thing is that my community hasn't got access to cash, when the wider community have access to cash, so they can get the access and buy whatever they need in Brixton. And that's what's happening.
And that, because I think you're absolutely right. Obviously there's an element of capitalism there, but there's also an element of racial profiling and various other discriminatory actions that have taken place and carry on taking place today, which we have to be very, very aware of, and that's a lot of why we're doing this project, to try and discuss a lot of this that has happened historically and that is continuing to now, in terms of balancing of economic power and independence and that kind of thing. But in the 70s or the 60s and 70s, as I've understood it, communities found ways of bypassing certain barriers, such as not being able to access money for mortgages or other such financial investments, by collectively pooling money together through the partner system, and then investing in that way. And that seemed to me to infer that in Brixton, the reliance on community and the importance of community was so important, potentially much more important here than it was in other places, because of the fact that people were relying on these very community-based initiatives and activities to develop personally, but also as a group. And I'm wondering, what is your take on that? How the community developed and the importance of community? Do you feel that still exists in Brixton, or is it being eroded away?
It's a very long statement or question.
Sorry, that was confusing.
But I think that there's a lot of issues in Brixton, and there's a lot of issues with the black community. Lack of education is one. Qualification is another. Access to cash is another. Opportunity doesn't come their way. After the riot, for instance, building were going in Brixton for like £1,000 or £10,000. Very huge building. They sold the academy for £1. So there was a lot of, but our community haven't got the business experience, and because of that, they couldn't take advantage of what was available. I don't see changing much at the moment. So I think if there's any intervention needed, where government, local and national should intervene to do more. Maybe there should be a fund that, trusted people can access to start their businesses. I did quite a bit myself. I started a business in Brixton, Choice FM. I struggled to get accommodation there, and in the end we had to move it away from Brixton to the borough. Because there were much help. I suppose in capitalism you don't get help. You don't get help in any way, shape or form. But I think things need to be done. This is why young people feel disadvantaged and become angry and not succeeding as they should be. It is a problem, and it needs to be addressed. Well, I suppose things like this have been happening around the world, in New York, in America, other countries. Brixton is well placed. It's got a tube station, it's got railway stations, it's got many bus routes, it's well located to the West End and to South London generally. So it's a place, and the houses are good and big. So people want to be there, and it's trendy. So it's always going to be difficult. It's always going to be a struggle. And unfortunately for Brixton, the high road is not long enough, and it's very difficult for you to get a shop or any building in Brixton. It's a very, very short stretch. In other places, like Streatham, for instance, there's 1 mile of shops that you could get. Brixton, I don't even think we have a quarter of a mile of shops. So it's very, very difficult to get premises generally. So that's all I can say on that.
What was the impetus for you to set up Choice FM? What was that responding to in you?
Well, like others, I felt I need to do things to inspire my community. And I think all my life I've been doing things like that. And what I'm saying to them is like, if I can do it, you can do it. And you can do it better because you've got a degree. You've been to university, go and do it better. And that's what I'm trying to say to them.
And that was what Choice FM was? That was your opportunity to just do it better?
Yes, the idea came that we needed something quality, that advertisers could advertising and people will read. And I felt that let me start that and somebody will come and do a better one, a more successful one. But nothing has happened.
And that radio station, can you take us back to the initial workings of it? How did it come together? Was it you? Was it a team of people? How did you come together and decide this is what we're going to do? This is where we're going to do it. Day one, let's go.
Well, the concept of Choice FM, our black radio station, came to me when I was doing a magazine and I did a special party night in the West End. I was invited by the club owner to do a party night, and I've told them, well, look, frankly, I can't see how I can get people there because the magazine is a monthly magazine and you need continuous promotion. So one of the guys said, look, don't worry about it. We'll promote it and we'll give you all the money on the door. I said, that sounds good. So I said, okay, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I'm not going to lose anything. So on the night, I got to the club, and I saw a queue of people around the club. And I thought, oh my God, the police has closed this place down again. And I walked through the crowd, got down to the reception, and the club was full of people, and those were waiting to come in. So I was like, my God, how did we get these people here? So the guy who put it on, the next day when he came to give us our money, I said, what did you do? How did you get the people there? He said, I put it on the radio that, if you're beautiful and you want to be on the cover of Root magazine, come to Gulliver's tonight. So all the beautiful women came to Gulliver's, and all their ugly friends followed them, and all the men came. And that's how the idea started. So the next day I went to my partners and said, look, let's start a radio station. This is a very powerful medium, much more powerful than a magazine. And we as black people, we can sing, we can dance, we can perform, but we don't own nothing. We don't own no rights, we don't own the copyrights of anything, we don't own the record companies, we don't own the distribution system. So let's do a radio station where we could make a more cohesive community, where people could expose their talent and we could play our own music and help commerce, businesses. And that's how Choice FM started.
If you were to have walked down Coldharbour Lane, for example, and then get to the junction with where it goes into Railton.
Yeah, Railton Road, yes.
That kind of, what would that have been sounding like, in the evenings on Friday evening in, say, 1981 or something like that? The kind of environment that, people just wouldn't know now, people of my generation.
Well, frankly, nothing was there. It was just quiet. Everybody's gone home. What they used to have is, they used to have what you call these shubin. You must have heard of that, where almost permanently there will be a party there every single Friday or Saturday night. And they would just turn on the sound system, which they made themselves. I'm sure you're aware of that. And because we didn't have any nightclub, you heard of my experience in Streatham. There's just one other club in Brixton called the Ram Jam. I'm sure people must have talked to you about that. And there was nowhere else, nothing else for us to do. So people would make parties every single weekend. There would be parties, several parties. And we will just sometime go walk along the street, whether it's Ater Road or Summerlayton Road, and hear the noise and just knock on the door. And people would say, well, who are you? I said, they wouldn't even ask, they just let us in. And we'll just keep ourselves quiet, don't make too much trouble, and dance until we're ready to go. But we wouldn't know the owner, we wouldn't know who's making the party. We just hear the noise and we follow those. But there were certain places where they were permanent, and you buy drinks and so forth. So yeah, it was fairly quiet at that time. There were no particular thing on the main road, or on Summerlayton Road, or on Coldharbour Lane, or anything like that. But around the area, there would be big sound system, we call them, shaking up the place. Noise pollution.
But they would be inside houses?
Yes, inside houses, wherever, yes.
And so if you kind of walk and then just kind of hear which shrine you wanted to go to?
Yes, we would hear it and we'll knock on the door, and it could be a private party, or it could be a wedding, or it could be anybody. We'll just find a way to get in. That's what usually happened.
How did Roots come together? What was it that initially sparked that? And then if you could give us a sense of the initial workings of that, what it took for you to actually get that going? Well,
what happened, there were many attempts to do publication. Like you look at the Claudia Jones newspapers, and there are many people that tried to do, but they've never been successful. because the community was too small and there was not enough revenue in the community to sustain that sort of publication. So as a photographer, I thought that I was so good that I wanted to have my work published in a magazine. But whenever I go to Fleet Street, I would get rejected. Nobody would even assign me, let alone printed my work, except the West Indian World. So whilst I was at the West Indian World, I sort of understand the business of publishing. You need a good printer at a cost-effective price, and you need, paper, and you need content, and of course the content should reflect the community, and of course you need advertisers, you need people to spend money to make it viable. And those are the things that I took away from West Indian World when I left in my head. And I felt that it's possible to do a magazine. But it was extremely difficult, but we started and looked at the type of magazine that would be necessary, or would be successful. And we felt that it should be leaning towards female, but male should also be involved in the editorial. It should not just be a female publication, because it wouldn't succeed. Not enough female black people were around. So the male will also have an interest. There will be articles about men succeeding and so forth. So we call it one step ahead, where the community, the person will always moving forward, always achieving. And we have articles about the achievers, those who make it in life. We had an article about Diane Albert and Paul Boateng, and had a successful blacks actors and all that. So we always given, an insight into the successes, inspiring young people so that they can also do well in sports or what have you. In fact, we were copying Ebony in America, that sort of style. And it worked pretty well, but unfortunately there were enough revenue coming in, so I started to go international. I distributed in Nigeria, and that went pretty well. And I did supplements and all those things. That's a way of getting revenue in. And it was during that period of understanding publishing that the idea of the radio came in, which I just described to you. You got enough of me. Come on.
Final question. Where were you working on whereabouts in Brixton were you working on the magazine?
We were not in Brixton.
Oh, you weren't?
No.
You went out to Bala?
No, we went to Victoria, and then we went to the West End, Duke Street, next to Selfridges. We felt that we wanted to be different. Advertisers wouldn't want to spend money with you if you're in Brixton. You've got to give them the environment. They have to believe that you're different, and they wouldn't feel comfortable spending money with a publisher based in Brixton at that time. Even today, they probably wouldn't be comfortable. Models wouldn't want to come, other people, advertising, they wouldn't want to come. You have to go uptown, you have to be in the business district to get that sort of support from advertisers.
We find that even today people have, when we say, oh, come and meet us in our office in Brixton, they say, Brixton? And we say, yeah.
Yeah, it has changed somewhat.
Yeah.
Because of computers and technology. You could have your publication anywhere in the world. But in those days, people come and look at you, check you out to see whether you can sustain the business. Because if they pay you money and you don't produce the magazine, the publication, they lose face with their clients. It's very important to give them confidence in you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.